Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. All right, welcome back for another episode of the Freight 360 podcast. We're up to Birmingham 205. Did I get that right? Is it Birmingham? It's got to be. Double checking on that. Anyway, episode 205 of the Freight 360 podcast. This episode is brought to you by Blue Book Services. Blue Book is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce. Their online database contains thousands of companies throughout the produce industry supply chain. You can easily search their database to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit ratings help you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com and click join today. That's producebluebook.com. Welcome back, everybody. We appreciate your continued listenership. We got a bunch of questions to get to at the end of today's episode, and those will air on Tuesday next week in the final mile. Continue to leave us comments on YouTube, submit your questions through our website, and share us with all your friends and colleagues in the industry. We have a special guest with us today, Stephen Ruhe. He is a freight broker with TMX Logitran, and he's actually a new Freight 360 contributor. Stephen, welcome to the show, man. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've been, Ben, how are you too, man? I don't want to skip over you.
No worries. Doing well, man. Trying to stay in air conditioning as much as humanly possible.
Fair enough. So, Stephen, you've, if you don't mind, just for anyone listening out there, probably doesn't know who you are, but you've been an active follower of ours for a while, and you've been in brokerage for a handful of years here. I know you started off your adulthood as a Marine, or not as a Marine, sorry, as a corpsman in the Navy, working with Marines. But tell us a little bit about you, man. How'd you get into freight, and how's everything going? What do you got going on as far as brokerage?
Yeah, so I share a similar story to most people, I think, that end up in this industry. So family was in it. Grandfather worked at Victor Express back in the day before it became US Express, and now it's Knight Swift. And when I was in high school, I worked at the trucking company cleaning out reefers, swore up and down I'd never be in logistics. Went off to college, didn't work out, went into the military, stayed there for about 5 years, got out, and then COVID hit, so needed a part-time job. Dad offered and turned into a full-time job. Now it's been about 4 years and can't say I hate it.
Yeah, we all kind of end up in freight and logistics, not by choice, but just kind of happens. Like Ben, you and I, same exact thing.
I don't think, and it's I think it's because, again, it's this giant thing in our industry that nobody really knows about, right? I got recruited into it, had no idea that it existed the way that it did, that there was a market, that any of this stuff functioned the way it did. And I was I just remember after the first interview I had when I got recruited, I was holy shit. I'm it's an entire financial market that operates behind the scenes that nobody knows about. And I'm super fascinating. But
I legitimately thought, so I worked at a distribution company as a sales rep though, at the tail end of college. And then it was my first full-time job after college. And we had a big logistics department, and they became a customer later on of a brokerage I worked for in the past. But I did not know, I did not understand what brokerage was. I didn't really learn it until I started working for an asset-based company, and it was an LTL carrier, and we would use brokers to line haul our cross-country stuff. So if we had, LTL small shipments, 1 pallet, 2, 3 pallets, whatever. So if they're going from New York to Pennsylvania, very simple. It just goes through a service center and it's delivered the next day. But if it's going from New York to California, it's either got to go through the LTL network of 7 different distribution centers and reship facilities, or you hire a freight broker, they send in a truckload carrier, you consolidate all of it, and it goes across the country in 3 days. So I had no idea, but that's how I learned it. And then I obviously got into it after that. But yeah, nobody really ever grows up saying, what do you want to be when you grow up, son? Oh, I want to be a freight broker. You know what I mean? No, you want to be a firefighter or a construction worker, or apparently now a YouTuber. That's I guess we're on YouTube, so I can't really diss on it. But anyway, yeah. It's all kind of like by mistake we all get into this industry. But anyway, Stephen, we're glad to have you on today. You do some work with meat, poultry, stuff like that, correct?
Yep. That would be the majority of my niche. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what we're gonna really drill into today when it comes to our topic is some of the considerations and really the way you can go about prospecting and working on that freight in the meat, poultry, beef, that kind of commodity as a niche market. So we'll get into that in a little bit here. I did want to give a little shout out to everybody for continuing to listen to our podcast, watch our videos on YouTube. We are approaching 800,000 views. And that blew my mind because I was looking at some of the, top folks in our space. And I saw like, obviously Paul from Freight Caviar is a friend of ours. We had him on the show a few months back earlier this year. And I looked at his page because I know it's very popular. And he was at like 200,000 views. I know he just started really getting into it like the last year or so. And I was like, what are we at? And I totaled it all up and I was like, holy cow, we were at like 780,000 total. And we've been doing it for longer, but it just goes to show that there is, there's a lot of opportunity for folks like us and Paul and everyone else out there, Chris Jolly, right? Just to name a few of us, to share the knowledge we have. And, we're all, at the end of the day, like the three of us on here today, we're all essentially competitors. We work at different companies when it comes to brokerage, but we can come together, share our knowledge and learn from one another. And that's one of the things I love about certain conferences like the TIA Policy Forum. You get 100 competitors all in the same room, and they're there to help share knowledge and grow themselves and each other versus try to hide their trade secrets and whatnot. So very cool. Appreciate the continued following of our content. Look forward to celebrating 1 million. I don't know what we do there. Do we get like a plaque from YouTube or something? Right?
I think we give away $1 million, so. Right? Like that's the logical thing, right?
We should make our own cryptocurrency, like Freight 360 coin, and we'll have it valued at like 0.00001 cents, and we'll give you 1 million of those worth like $3. So, but yeah, stay tuned. Sports. Ezekiel Elliott, if you're a football fan, he was with the Cowboys obviously for a number of years. Just signed this week with the New England Patriots. So Belichick just trying to pull some moves there and strengthen up his least favorite team in the AFC East. It was just a 1-year deal. We'll see how that pans out. Stephen, I don't think I even ever asked you. I assume you're a Bengals fan, being a Cincinnati-ish local guy. What's your?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yep. Bengals fan it is, and I don't know if you've caught it, but I've made a couple Bengals comments on LinkedIn.
I did.
Account, so.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, that's all is fair in love and war in football apparently. So, I'm a big fan of Joe Cool. I like Joe Burrow. I think he's an awesome quarterback. And I also the good takeaway from last year is that I would say because we're playing each other this year, the Bengals and the Bills, and you guys will play the Chiefs and we'll play the Chiefs. I like the matchup between the Bills and the Bengals better. I think it's more of a exciting matchup than the years and years that the Bills and the Chiefs have just fought back and forth. I think there's a new sheriff in town to claim the throne. So we'll see.
Yeah, I agree. And I think after the incident with Damar Hamlin, it'll be an interesting dynamic because there was a lot of love throughout the NFL, but especially between the teams. And so it'll be interesting to see that rivalry going forward.
Yep. Dude, it was like 2017, I want to say, when the Bills broke their playoff drought after almost 20 years because Andy Dalton had a crazy play that you guys won the game and somehow it pushed the Bills into a wild card slot. I think you guys upset like the Ravens or something. I forget what it was, but yeah. So I think we sent a bunch of chicken wings to the Bengals team and fans for that. So we have a good love between our two teams, but a good rivalry. The other thing on sports is the Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg fight. It's like this thing that's been going back and forth since I think June through Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. I had to like recap myself on it because it's been on and off. But I was like, why do these two want to fight each other? Like, what's the thing? And then I forgot like Twitter and Threads, right? That was like the whole thing. So Facebook and Instagram, Zuckerberg makes this new like basically Twitter copycat Threads. And did you guys know that like Elon Musk or Twitter like sent them a cease and desist for stealing proprietary trade secrets or whatever it was. Basically, their platform or their way of how Twitter works. Apparently,
No, I
that
didn't hear
a
that.
couple months ago. But anyway, so I think there was a proposed fight that Elon Musk had. Zuck replied saying, like, give a location. I even heard rumors about like the Colosseum in Rome, like being
they pitched it. Like Elon posted that. So I think Zuck posted like anytime, any place, right? From like MMA, basically like calling him out.
Mm-hmm.
And then somewhat like a week or two ago, pretty recently, Elon put out that like he negotiated with Italy and the Colosseum to be able to do it there, where like the entire background is going to be ancient Rome, whatever. And then from there, it was like discredited. And then I heard Zuck said like, well, let's just do it in my backyard in my octagon. And then Elon said, well, I've got to have surgery and I've got to do this. And then they basically were kind of going back and forth about who bitched out and who wasn't going to actually like go and show up.
I'm a little shocked because, I mean, at one point you had Joe Rogan backing it. You had Dana White backing it.
Yeah.
And you've got the richest man in the world. And then Zuckerberg, I didn't know if you guys knew this, is a black belt and had just won a
jiu-jitsu, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like 5 years or like 7 years training like jiu-jitsu, like hardcore. And like Elon was like, I'm going to do the walrus on him. Like, I'm bigger. I'm just going to lay on him. And everybody was like, are you kidding me? Like, Zuck's going to kick his ass.
I saw that, Zuckerberg, he was even training here and there with like Lex Friedman, who's big into jiu-jitsu as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea that Mark Zuckerberg got into martial arts until like earlier this year. But two just billionaire tech gurus. I would love, like, I'm with you, Stephen. I'm a little disappointed that it's not going to happen.
Yeah,
that would be. I mean, you could sell that on pay-per-view for like $250, and I bet people would tune in and make the two rich billionaires even richer. So
and make the Paul brothers look silly with how much money that would bring.
Oh yeah.
Side note, I watched that documentary. My buddy texted me about it over the weekend, and that kind of blew my mind. I know you've referenced it a few times on conversations, Nate, on the show. Like, I had no idea that any of that even like really transpired. And just watching the documentary, I'm like, that's pretty nuts in and of itself.
Which one? Jake and Logan Paul?
Yeah, they did a documentary that basically kind of shows them, it gives their backstory, but it's more about, I guess, Jake and fighting and them being a promoter. And they interview Tyson and a few other people about like how they're really helping bring boxing back kind of mainstream in some ways. And controversial, obviously, but I was still impressive. The fights that he won and who he fought against, I was just like, honestly, it was
Jake
way more.
The boxer?
Yeah, the younger one.
Yeah.
Jake was the boxer, and he fought like, again, like the MMA's like top guy, but he boxed him. He didn't fight him in mixed martial arts, but he won. And then he fought someone else after, I think that was the second guy. Dana White called him out. He said, look, Jake Paul's never fighting this guy. And he basically then went and fought him and won. And then like, he was 6-0 before he fought boxer. I can't remember the last guy he fought, but at the end, I'm not going to ruin the documentary, but anyone that saw the fight,
Fair
like,
enough.
He loses kind of the last one, but it was nuts.
Crazy. Well, good stuff. We'll shift to news here. Again, TIA Policy Forum is the 25th to the 27th of September. If you have not registered, I highly recommend it. That's the event that I referenced last year, going to DC, lobbying with all the senators and representatives from various states on various topics regarding our brokerage industry. It's obviously hosted and done with the TIA as kind of the spearhead there. A great opportunity. FMCSA is going to be there for a listening session. I'll be there. If anyone's going to be there, hit me up. Would love to meet with anybody that's going to be boots on the ground in DC next month. Diesel rates are up. It's interesting. So like historically, when we look at what are freight rates and how are they trending, you'd look at diesel as like a big indicator. But the last few years with COVID, it's been more of a supply demand, and fuel is kind of like a much smaller, I guess, driving force when it comes to rates. But obviously diesel spiked last year about spring, late winter into spring, and then definitely into summer, and have tailed down since like February of this year. But now they're back up to another high of like in the last 6 months. So we'll see where that goes. And then lastly, and again, you can see all this stuff in our newsletter. Make sure you go to the website and subscribe. It's freight360.net. There's a subscribe to the newsletter button right on the homepage. Produce rates, if you're in the produce sector, that is it's not freight rates we're talking about. It's actually the price of produce itself has been up recently. And one of the big ones that I saw the report on from Blue Book in the last week was pineapples. And obviously the impact from the wildfires in Hawaii that happened last week, which is just absolutely insane. But there's a lot of the heat out in the West Coast and across the country in general that have just really impacted the growing and harvesting of a lot of different various produce commodities. So you'll see that impacting some of your customers when it comes to price sensitivity with rates and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind. Before we get into the episode, let's give a shout out to our friends at DAT, and then we'll get right into it.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the industry. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Take advantage of a free month of DAT1 when you use the link in the show notes.
And I will add to that, too. So one of the things, obviously, we had Jeff on from DAT last week. So one of the things that DAT is doing to combat fraud is if you are a new sign-up and you don't have an MC number yet, they're going to want you to call in and verify. So if you do want to get the free month through us, just make sure you tell them Freight 360 sent you. Or, once you get your MC assigned to you, which you can by all means wait until you get that to go ahead and get your load boards, you could do it that way as well. So, all right, good stuff. So we're going to talk meat today. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have personally much experience with meat as a commodity when it comes to shipping. We've definitely had customers that do it. I've never personally been involved in it. Ben, how about you? Did you do anything with meat? I know actually on the bulk side you are now, right?
On the protein side, but not like meat as like a finished good. So okay. I've moved some meat in hoppers and things for the larger meat producers in the country. But again, different than I think what we're really going to dig into today.
Yeah, and that's so for that exact reason, we always love to have somebody that's a subject matter expert and does this day in and day out. And Stephen, that's why we thought this would be a great opportunity to have you on and talk about meat. So just kind of to start off, and this might sound like a dumb question, but what are some of the general actual goods when it comes to meat as a commodity? Like, are we talking finished frozen chicken, or is it like straight up out of the butcher or grinder? What are the different kinds of like the actual meat commodities and some of the types of shippers that somebody would come across with that being their niche?
Yeah, so there's a couple different finishes, right? So it depends on who you're prospecting and who you're talking to, but you can get the raw materials, which is you're typically dropping a trailer at, and someone in the facility is chopping up that cow or chicken and putting it into a case, and it's going on your truck, and you're taking.
So you're telling me like straight up, a driver pulls up, and at that facility, there's just. I picture it like from the movie Rocky, where he's like, isn't he like punching like hanging cows or whatever it is, right? Is it like that kind of facility?
Yeah. So before they put the product in cases, your reefers would have to have meat hangers in them. So you'd hang like the carcass, and it would go down to the next facility. I don't know of anyone that does that still. If you do, let me know. I'd be interested. But,
every mob movie ever, including one of the final scenes in Goodfellas where they find Carboni, right, frozen in the meat locker, right, in the truck. But yes,
right. Yeah. So for raw materials, all the way down to finished goods, it's getting delivered to Walmart and everything in between.
So it kind of reminds me back to our conversation with Trent from Lumber Blue Book, Ben, when we talked about, you think about lumber and there's just so many different types of lumber to ship, and there's different types of shippers along the way. It's not like it goes right from a tree to Home Depot, right? There's different places in between that make a raw material that's, partially finished, but not, and then it moves on to maybe a generic piece of wood and then to a specialty type of crafted shingle or piece of furniture. And meat seems like the same kind of thing, Stephen, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's going to move from a cattle farm, right, to somewhere that's going to do some sort of initial processing and then shipped again, or maybe stays in the same place, but another facility or part of that same facility that would then take that partially finished or processed meat and turn it into maybe chicken patties or sausages or something like that. Is that correct?
Yeah. And it all just depends on how that facility is set up. So some of them are vertically integrated, where they go from the feed to the cows to the processing to the finished product, and some of them they partial it out just like any other industry. So maybe they get the cows from the farm and then it goes to a grinder and so on and so forth.
In your experience, I'm curious on this. Do they tend to regionalize the whole 360-degree circle on that? What I mean is, if I'm in Buffalo, right? The meat that I'm going to eat, is there a chance it's coming from the West Coast, or is it going to be more geographically regionalized to my area? And I'm not talking about specialized stuff. I'm talking about a hamburger.
It could come from Brazil or Australia. Yeah. USDA shelf life on most of that stuff. And it's dependent on the packer, really, which is the people that are putting it into the cases or whatever. But shelf life is usually a year if you're freezing it. I've got customers that ship stuff out of New Zealand and Australia and Brazil, and it gets put into a container and brought to the ports and goes off to someone to mix it into their product.
That's crazy. I'd never, like I said, I don't have the firsthand experience that you do in this, so I'm learning a lot here. How about actual type of animal? What are the common ones that? Well, first of all, what are you guys moving yourselves, and then what are some of the common ones that you've either prospected or you're familiar with? Obviously cow, but what else?
Yeah, cattle is my main. We do some poultry. My manager, Brian, does a lot of poultry. And then that's kind of the majority of it. I'm sure there's specialties out there, but those are really small, typically LTL. If you're
do you do anything with pork?
Pork. The pork that I used to run was on pizza.
Okay.
No, I haven't really done pork. It's usually just cattle.
So I think about we talk about prospecting in general, how do I generate leads? And it's one of the things we talk about is everyday items that you consume or that are around you. And I think about the kind of meat products that I either eat at home or at a restaurant, or I have in my fridge right now. And I think the stuff like turkey, chicken, ham, bacon, which obviously both come from pig, beef from whether it's a burger or a steak or whatever, right? Hot dogs. You think about it, there's a ton of different kinds of meat out there. Any idea on does one, and we'll kind of shift to the prospecting side. If I'm going to prospect meat products, do any of these companies that you prospect, do they tend to handle more than one type of meat, or is it hey, this one's usually just beef, this one does turkey, this one does chicken? What does that tend to look like?
So for the most part, it's one commodity. It's either beef, it's turkey, it's poultry, whatever. And then, you do have the places like Tyson, which they do a little bit of everything, but that's never at the same facility because you can't run cattle through the machines and then run turkey through it because there's too much cleaning and all the USDA regulations and stuff.
That brings up a really good point. And you mentioned USDA. So I think this reminds me of produce, right? Cross-contamination of different kinds of product. So yes, you can't take one kind of meat, run it through the processing plant, and then just all of a sudden put a different kind of meat through there. Same thing with different kinds of produce that can't be around each other. We had Blue Book on talking about what commodities will make other ones basically ripen at a different speed. Ben, were you going to hop in and say something there?
Yeah, I wanted to segue a little on this topic to something we were all talking about, which I think is really good for our listeners, right? Is just related to the USDA, right? There's regulations and I'm going to lead into the question in regards to like how long you have in every aspect of it, right? Like, so how long before the animal basically has to be slaughtered? And then how long from when it's slaughtered does it have to be before it's used, right? Talk a little bit about how those requirements maybe create opportunities for freight brokers or within shipping because of just the nature of the USDA process and the regulations that make them do business in certain ways.
So I will say I can't speak to the USDA regulation piece, but I do know for the fresh side, your customers, some of mine in particular, there is a certain amount of time from when that cattle is killed to when they need that raw material so that it mixes well with whatever else they're mixing in there. And the one that I run is typically 4 days, like from the day it's dead to the day it gets processed. It can't be older than 4 days. And that includes transit time. So,
well, and talk a little bit about that because we talked about that off air, right? So, okay, let's say you've got 4 days, right? And the price of, we'll say, beef, just for a round number, is $1 a pound, right? What happens if you deliver it late and the price is at $1.20 a pound and you're outside that window or inside it, right? Talk a little bit about what we were talking about off air.
Yeah. So, with the meat industry, and this kind of goes to another topic with food brokers, but the USDA is on a daily market fluctuation. So the pound of that product or the price of that per pound of that product could fluctuate in I believe it's an AM and PM price range. So if you show up a day late and say the price of that beef per pound has went up 10 cents, there is a very good likelihood that your customer or your customer's customer is going to claim you that price back, and vice versa. If the price drops, then your customer, because they've now lost that revenue that was baked into their margin when they sold it.
So I think, Ben, another point you alluded to, if I was reading into that, is the sense of urgency when it comes to timing of delivery, right?
Yes.
Because we talk about rate versus date, right? If a customer is price sensitive, they're not going to be able to be picky on when their shipment is picked up and delivered, because I can get you a good rate, but I've got to have flexibility and time to go out and find options. I'm not trying to find a quote unquote cheap truck. I'm just trying to find you an option for a truck that costs us less because it's shorter deadhead from their origin and maybe it's a backhaul for them. They're not cheap as in a bad way. It's just their cost and the importance for that truck is different than the average market truck. So now in this case, if it's a very time sensitive thing, rate for your customer is less. I mean, it's always a consideration, but it's probably less important that, hey, it's got to be the cheapest price that I get quoted. It's, I need a truck that's going to be reliable and get the product to the receiver on time without worry of it breaking down, without worry about X, Y, and Z that could delay it. Is that, Stephen, do you see that when you're quoting and when you're talking to your customers?
Yeah. So the majority of my customers, the majority of the freight that I move is 24-hour notice. So they land a deal, I get an email or a phone call, and I've got a truck that's got to show up that day.
How much flexibility do they give you on your pricing? Is it like a gentleman's agreement on, hey, I trust Stephen to give me a fair rate, or is it like, hey, here's what we expect to pay. It's got to be within 10 to 15% of that average. What is like their price sensitivity and flexibility look like on average?
So if you're working well with your customer, this is something that you've built over time. You tend to know the prices, and they will ask you like, "Hey, what is this going to cost me if I make this deal today?" And so there's a little bit of flexibility in that, and then you become an advisor for them on their deals. And so, like I would say, a year ago, one of the things I helped with one of my customers was when the ports were all backed up. Actually, it's probably 2 years ago now. When the ports were all backed up during COVID, they were trying to import beef, and they kept sending the beef to LA and Philly. And I was like, why don't you move it to Charleston? And we can pull the stuff out of there. It's not as backed up. It won't cost you as much, and we can save you some money on that end. And we're still coming out of Charleston today. It's been a benefit. But yeah, the price sensitivity is, there's a lot in the beginning, it's hard to, when you're starting new with a customer, to guarantee them a rate because the stuff is so last minute. But once you work with them over the, say, a month, typically you know where they're buying product and you know where they're sending it to. So you can lock in those relationships with carriers, and like I would say 90% of the product that I have to ship, I already know who the carrier is going to be before I even have it put into my system, and it's covered within 10 minutes.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at Lean, and then I want to get back to that. Are you looking to take your freight brokerage or agency to the next level? Look no further than Lean Solutions Group. They are industry leaders in nearshore staffing for logistics companies with offices located in South America, Mexico, and the Philippines. They offer a wide range of exciting positions, including freight broker back office operations, accounting, tech and web development, business development, marketing, customer service, and more. Don't miss out on the opportunity to work with the best in the business. Visit their website at www.leangroup.com to learn more about the exciting solutions they have to offer your brokerage or agency. That's LEAN group.com. All right, back to what you were saying, Stephen. You mentioned a lot about the relationship and how you become an advisor to them. And Ben, I want to let you hop in because it sounded like you had something you wanted to add in, but I love the whole you become an extension of their supply chain versus just being a transactional broker. But Ben, what do you got?
So what you outlined in two, I want to break down for a second because these are the things that I look for when I'm researching a commodity or a prospect type, like within a niche or an industry, right? Because these are really the hot buttons for brokerages to add value. And one of them is if you've got a company that's got to ship no matter what, meaning like the animals need to go somewhere. They need to be slaughtered and they need to be shipped to either cold storage to freeze to go to one market, or they need to be processed to be eaten within a certain time. There is nobody that's extending that time, which means they have no ability to just put that on a shelf in a building and wait for the market to change. So what matters most when you have those things in common? It's got to go, and the company that's manufacturing it has no choice. It now means service is important. They'll tell you all day long that they care more about rate than service, but at the end of the day, if that doesn't move on that day, there's a huge cost to that shipper, full stop. So when they argue with the broker and say, hey, I won't pay this, I want the cheaper carrier, I'll wait, you know they can't wait. So that's why you know they care about service, not just price. That is something very unique, right, within that niche that is not something you see in like green lumber or shipping gravel or something that's very commoditized. You can always wait a day or two and get a cheaper truck. In your niche, you cannot, which means it's very, 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 in my opinion, geared towards opportunities for brokerage. And then the other thing that you talked about, right, is food brokers, right? And you talk a little bit about what they actually do, because again, just because this company needs to get it out of their facility doesn't mean there's somebody in that market that can actually take it that day, or that the same company they normally sell their stuff to can take all of what they have on any given day, right? Because, you know, they've got to get rid of it. So how is that like inflexibility worked out in the market? Like, again, you got something that's got to go, but you don't necessarily have your current customers that can take everything you have every day. So how is that worked out in the market, and what opportunities does that create?
Yeah. So let me answer this in a couple ways. So one, I know what the viewers want. They want to know prospecting and lead generation, all that stuff. So food brokers are a great way to get into the meat and poultry industry. And the reason why food brokers exist is because, like you were getting to, the companies like, you know, Tyson, Purdue, Butterball and stuff, the animals have to get processed. They have to go. They cannot stay. And when their customers cannot take the product because they're not making sales or whatever it is, that's when food brokers come in. And typically how it works is they'll get a list from all these processing plants and says, this is the excess material that we have, whether it's breast or chicken necks or, you know, beef patty, whatever it is. And that goes out to a list of brokers. And then those brokers scour that list for what their customers' needs might be. And then they will purchase that at a little bit of a discount and then sell it just the way we move freight. And so where the opportunity lies for someone who's looking to get into shipping meat is finding those food brokers. And because I guarantee you find a food broker, you're going to get put on a list with 30, 40 other brokers because they need the service, they need the stuff to ship, and it needs to go today.
Yep.
And
So let me ask you this, right? There's load lists in all kinds of industries. Lumber, steel, a lot of building materials in general. Seen it in produce. If somebody gets on a load list with 40 other brokers, is there anything you can do to differentiate yourself to not be one of the 40 and be one of the preferred like 3 who get offered loads before it goes out?
Yeah, so it's all about relationships, right? And that's the majority of this industry. If you get onto that list, you should be talking to those people every single day because they have chances just like we do in locking down dedicated product. And there's a very good chance if one of their salesperson happens to get in the door at a processing plant and lock down, this excess meat that they have, that broker, that food broker, may just give you that lane. And so that's always an opportunity.
Yeah, that's huge because I mean it's really the same concept with any of the other commodities, right? You get you get your foot in the door, aka you're on a load list, and then you've got to differentiate yourself through relationship building and building rapport to be that person that in this case meat broker, food broker that they want to work with because they like you, they feel like they know you, they've got some trust and belief in the fact that you'll get the job done for them. So, and that doesn't happen with the flip of a switch. It's like you said, you've got to be calling them every single day. You're probably talking about more than just meat, right? You're probably building some personal relationships about their family. Like I was talking to somebody yesterday about how they can differentiate and build trust and really market themselves to a prospect. And I said, it's different for everybody, but there's probably something that you have in common with that other person that you're both somewhat passionate about. I know this is not meat related, but it's relationship building in general. So like for me, and it's not like a salesy schmoozy thing to do. It's just, I want to be able to interact and do business with somebody that I have things in common with. So it's like, if they have kids, I have kids, right? We have that in common. If they have a love for sports, right? I have a love for sports. If they're into, or if they're a veteran, right? Like you got, like I'm a veteran, you're a veteran. We have things in common. We could shoot the shit for, I'm sure, hours and hours on end about our time in the military. But it could be anything. It could be a sport that you play. It could be a college you went to. It could just be an activity like fishing or hunting that you like to do. There's always a way to talk outside of just shop and build a relationship with somebody. And you could do that when you're calling them every single day. So I know I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but that's really important.
Just to add on to that, and when you get into a customer, whether it's in the meat industry or any other industry, if they're sending out load lists and the only thing you're doing is responding to that list and you're not talking to them, I mean, you're just gonna be another broker on the list. But the majority of the conversations that I have with my customers on a daily basis, probably 5% is actually about work. Whether it's at the beginning of the conversation or the end of the conversation, exactly. It's, hey, this is what's going on. We need to do this. Great, sounds good. How's your day? How's everything going? Cleveland still sucks.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, to be honest, the way I always used to look at it after I got like my first customers was it really felt more like I was going to work with them than the people sitting next to me. Because that's who you talk to all day, right? Like I might go sit in a room with 60 other brokers, but my customers are the ones I literally start my day talking to. I start my day at 7, sometimes before then. I'm calling them and going, hey, what's going on? What happened from last night? Everything go well? Did we get anything come through that we didn't know about? What's the lay of the land for the day? You get that out of the way. And then it's like, what did you do last night? What are you guys up to later? How's your son doing? Did they win the ball game last night? It's literally exactly the same conversation you have. Like if you worked physically in a warehouse next to somebody, but it's somebody across the country and another state. And like, that's really the glue that I think, it's not the contracts, right? In freight brokerage and even in trucking, like this is really what is the value of a book of business. It's the underlying relationship.
Yeah. And Ben, we've talked about this before. If somebody emails, hey, quote me on this, to Stephen's point, don't just email back a price. Pick up the phone and call them and get some more context and open up the opportunity for you to have a conversation with them.
Here's the biggest thing, right? It is very difficult in any type of sales where you've got to make multiple conversations before you get business, right? We always say it's like between 8 to 12, give or take the market, right? So if you got to have 10 or 12 conversations with somebody where you're just starting to build that, maybe you do a little bit, but it's not a real relationship yet, you've got to find shit to talk about, right? So when somebody sends me a lane list or any request for a quote, I'm like, great, that's a reason for me to call them where I'm not just asking them what's going on. To Stephen's point, initiate a conversation, and then I'm going to pivot right into whatever their interests are. Like, hey, did you catch the football game last night or whatever that is, right? You use it as an opportunity to get on the phone to speak to them because, and it's not FaceTime, but the more times you're actually talking with them, you're building rapport. Whether or not you think you are or not, that's how human beings actually find out if we want to spend more time with another human being. Do they share our values? Do they look for things the way we do? Are they ethical in the same ways we do, right? Like those are the things that really happen in small talk, which I always find comical when somebody goes, I don't make that small talk. That's just a waste of time. I get to business. I'm like, you probably don't get down to much of it though, because nobody wants to work with people like that, to be honest.
Yeah. Right. No, you're absolutely right. I do want to hit on some operational considerations, and you hit on one of them, Stephen, already, which is the potential for claims. And I want to revisit it real quick. So obviously time sensitivity, because the actual price of the product can fluctuate more than once in a day. You said there's the AM and PM pricing. So let's say there's a delay and the price goes up, and you said the customer is going to want to claim us as the transportation portion of it for that. Is that correct? Which, I mean, ultimately would fall on the carrier's insurance, or we would try to claim the carrier's insurance. But what does that look like if you actually go through one of those claims?
So it's to be honest, it's kind of like any other claim when it comes to like damages or whatever. Instead of it being damaged product, if it's the carrier's fault, it's a price problem. And the customer, whoever it is, whether it's the receiving end or the shipping end, they're going to want to recover those losses. And typically you get a claim for the offset of the price, and then you have to figure out whether it was our fault on a scheduling piece, or maybe it was at one of these processing plants and the cattle weren't cooperating that day, so it took 10 hours to get loaded instead of 4. So there's a lot of investigation that goes into get to the root cause of why there was a delay, and then assign blame. But then the other thing is you also have to make sure that whoever is justifying the loss can prove it, because that's the first thing any insurance company is going to ask is, where's the proof? Like, you're telling me it's a 20-cent loss, but where's the
sale? It can fall on the broker, it could fall on the carrier, it could fall on the shipper. I mean, it could fall on any one of those parties.
Mm-hmm.
And we do see that in other commodities all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And we talked about this off air, but the awkward situation is when, if your customer is the shipper and it's their fault, but obviously nobody wants to take blame for it, they're going to try and say it was somebody else's fault. That could lead to a very hard conversation to have, where you have to figure out a balance between, hey, my customer's wrong, I need to make that very clear to them, versus I don't want to lose my customer. Have you ever had to have one of those conversations, or are the shipper tend to be more reasonable when it comes to that kind of stuff, if it's on them?
It all depends on who you're talking to.
Fair enough.
Sometimes it's a good conversation and it's constructive, and you kind of work on a way on how we can optimize this and make it better. And then sometimes it's, you're grabbing teeth, and depending, it's a judgment call. It's, do they pay me enough to eat this and just say whatever and we'll address it later, or does it not enough and we'll fight it and maybe we lose the customer, but it wasn't that much money in the first place.
I would also add this. In every one of those instances that happened, especially early on, like the first few years in freight brokerage, I was terrified that I was going to lose like the entire relationship when something like, things go wrong. Some of them were worse than others. And, there's that fear of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose all this. And I worked so hard to build this and everything, right? But the thing I learned on the other side is that in every single one of those, and again, this is just my personal experience. It doesn't mean that's true for every time this happens, but I ended up with a better, stronger relationship on the other end. And it's like, again, like when you go through something either stressful or worrisome, that's where your character is revealed, right? Like your character isn't revealed in doing day-to-day things. Everybody knows you can get a truck, right? What they're really worried about is, are you going to do the thing that they asked you to do when it's difficult or you don't want to, right? So even though there's a lot of emotional hesitancy, I think, to making the phone calls we're talking about, I think those probably go farther in building real lasting relationships than just doing good work and avoiding mistakes, right? Because that's really where they get to see who you are and the kind of person you are when the rubber meets the road, as opposed to just, I can get you a truck when it's easy to get a truck. Well, everyone can do that, right? And again, I think those are just more reasons. If anyone's hesitant out there when these things do happen, it's better to do it early, like Nate says, because the longer you wait, the worse you look. And if you do it sooner, even if they're pissed and even if they yell and even if they hang up, once they calm down, usually in 10 minutes or an hour later, you got level heads, you find a solution, and you both get to see who you really are when things get stressful.
Yeah, I always say bad news gets worse with time, and it's so true. I do want to wrap up the operational part. I want to segue this, and it's related, but if there could be fault on the shipper, the broker, or the carrier. So our goal as a broker is make sure you're doing everything in your power to make sure it's not you that's ever potentially at fault for something. So if it comes to you gave a driver the wrong time or the wrong date, or you send the wrong equipment in, or you have there could be a claim on the actual product if it's damaged or spoiled because you had an issue with the reefer temperature or something like that. Anytime you've got a temperature controlled product, it is extremely important to double and triple check the reefer settings. Is it continuous versus cycling between a certain range? And what is that temperature being set to? I've seen horror stories where Celsius and Fahrenheit were confused and the temperature was set wrong. And you might think, well, there's such different numbers when you're dealing with Celsius and Fahrenheit. Well, as that number gets lower, they're not really that far off. So if you've got someone that doesn't know, if a driver doesn't know a commodity super well and they hear a low number and they think it's Celsius versus Fahrenheit, you could be talking freezing a product versus keeping it at a cool but not frozen temperature, and you could damage your product that way. And that'll happen in like lettuce and produce and stuff like that, where it's not supposed to be frozen. We've all probably had that bag of lettuce in our fridge that was too close to something and it ended up all crispy with ice on it or whatever. But yeah, that stuff's huge. So double and triple checking the reefer settings, the temperature, the dates and times, equipment type, all of that. And also when it comes to using a reefer trailer, make sure your driver understands how the temperature and how long it takes for them to pre-cool it. Because they can't just turn on a reefer if it's 90 degrees in Scottsdale, Arizona, and assume it's going to get down to 36 degrees Fahrenheit in 20 minutes. It doesn't happen like that. Some of these guys have to turn on or guys and gals have to turn on their reefer unit well in advance. We're talking an hour plus to get their entire unit at the right temperature for loading. So
just to add on to that, so one of the things, so I require that all the trailers that are hauling the product be able to download the reefers, whether they can download it remotely or it has to go somewhere. I need to at least see it download, because one of the other things they do, and this. So
you do that even if there's not a claim or an issue with it.
I want to make sure that
that's a smart tip right there. I like that.
Yeah. And I don't need to download. I just want to make sure that it is possible that reefer can be downloaded. And then, because one of the issues that my manager Brian ran into, I think they were moving chicken, and it was freshly killed, but is getting moved to be frozen. So en route, they would pack the product with dry ice, and I think it came down to the product was getting too cold. It was too warm, and what was happening is the dry ice was on top, but they didn't put any on the bottom. So they tried to claim for the whole load, and then they downloaded the reefer and then saw that the reefer temperatures were right, and then realized that it was the dry ice that was the issue. They were packing the dry ice wrong. So I ended up going back on the shipper. So I haven't dealt with that too much, but I don't want to deal with it. So reefer downloads are important.
I've only ever had to deal with them when it comes to an actual claim in the truck trying to prove that they didn't have any breach when it came to, temperature spiking for whatever reason. So that's interesting. It's a good tip. Not even like asking the driver to prove anything to you, but just verifying that it's possible that they can do a reefer download. It's good. Any last tips or thoughts for anybody that's either new to the meat industry or considering prospecting it? Just things to think about, what you love about it, what you don't like about it, or just anything random.
I mean, it's a big world, and it's recession proof. So
we all got to eat, right?
Yeah, you might not need floors, but you definitely need some meat. So it's a good commodity to be a part of. Good.
Well, I like it. Well, Stephen Ruhe, it's great to have you on, man. If you guys want to hear more from Stephen, make sure to check out the Final Mile dropping on Tuesday, where he's going to be joining us for our listener Q&A session. Stephen, if people want to reach out to TMX or to you, how do they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, and then our website is tmxtransport.com. Might have to double check that. Yeah.
And his last name's Ruhe. It's Ruhe. So you can find him on LinkedIn. Love it. Ben, any final thoughts on your end?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. And if you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.